Yeah, hi everybody. So anyway, we're continuing with going through the steps through the first 103 pages of the big book. And this is part 2. And we got up to page 14, but I did want to start on the bottom of page 13. But before I do that, let me read something that's very important. You know, the very, very beginning and the forward to the first edition. We read this last time, but I think maybe we'll read it every time. And it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seamlessly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, you're sure that our way of living has advantages to all. So how does that, think about that. Whatever, we usually cover all addictions here, but think about the hopelessness. And here it's giving you some hope precisely how we have recovered. It's a beautiful instruction book, and I know it works every time if we do the work. And it says that, it promises us that if we do this work through the big book, and it says in italics precisely how we have recovered. So we have a roadmap, a way to do this. Whereas before, I didn't know. I'd go from self-help books to all kinds of professionals and trying to figure it out. And there were 10,000 different ways of doing it. But all I know is every single way failed until I did this form of recovery through the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is basically, was based on a religious program. It's really spiritual in nature, encompasses all the philosophies through the centuries. A lot of people may say to you, well, it's a cult, the 12-step programs, but every philosophy that I've read in religion, it's all encompassed in this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And billions of people today believe in religions and find salvation through religions and a way of recovery to their problems. So here we go, really outlined it here. And people come in here of religious faiths, find this outline, brings them closer in a way to an aha moment. We have what's called the spiritual awakening. And right into that, on page 13 we got up to, and in Bill's story, Bill went through the steps on page 13, and he had that spiritual awakening. And his friend told him, he said on the bottom of page 13, he says, my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter into a new relationship with my Creator, and I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. That's pretty amazing. It says, all my problems. We came in here, maybe we want to stop drinking, want to be with a hopeless variety, compulsive eater, we're restricting whatever compulsion we had towards food. But here it says, it answered all my problems. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. How can we have an answer to all our problems? And it goes on to say, and it's telling us here, belief in the power of God plus enough willingness, honesty, humility, right? The willingness, right? In step 2, we're going through the steps here. Bill just went through all the, page 13, he went through all the steps there. But basically these stories in here we're really doing in the very beginning of this book, 1, 2, and 3. So we needed the willingness to believe in the power, great in ourselves, with that step 2 to be restored to sanity, honesty and humility to establish and maintain a new order of things with the essential requirements. And use the word new. Being born again, being renewed, and a belief in the power of God with enough willingness, honesty, and humility. How? Honesty, openness, and willingness. And I love this next paragraph here where it goes on page 14 at the top there. It says, simple, but not easy, a price had to be paid. So whenever you go for a course or whatever you do that's going to help you, there's a price to be paid. So I was wondering, when you read this, how much does it cost us to do it? It meant, and it's telling us here what the price is. Now, actually, when you think about it, this is a pretty big price. This is a huge, huge price we have to pay. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. And how does our ego and the self want to hang on? But it's telling us here, this is the price. And it's telling us what we must do, turn all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. So at least I know it's a big price I have to pay to let go. Actually, that's what it's saying. And give up my will to God, my understanding, spiritual side of God of my understanding. But it's also telling me in the next paragraph, So to let me know, these are revolutionary and drastic proposals.
If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button.
Revolutionary and drastic proposals. But the moment I fully accepted him, so it's telling us all the other ways I tried it, because you know what it says, it's interesting here on page 13. Right above above where I had read and began, it says, common sense would become uncommon sense. This is the second to the last paragraph. So our common sense, which we rely upon all the time, told us we had to analyze it, figure it out, understand it. With our addiction to alcohol, drugs, or with food, we had to figure out the best way to control it. Step one, this is part of step one, common sense. Common sense told us, and we were brought up to think we could control things, but in step one says we're powerless. So these are revolutionary and drastic. It's letting you know up front that this isn't going to be easy. The effect, but the moment I fully accepted them, it's saying it's not easy, but when we get to that point of the step 12, having had that spiritual awakening, when we fully accept them, faith, that's faith. I mean, that's part of step 3, faith, right? Step 2 is hope. And, so it says the effect was electric, the sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity I had never known. So we do everything in life to be happy. We're here for this program. We were unhappy in our addiction, whether it was alcohol, drugs, people addiction, money addiction, food addiction. The reason those addictions made us so miserable, we made that our higher power. We missed out on all of life. And then when it wasn't there, we never got enough of it. We wanted more and more. So here it's saying the sense of victory. How many people want victory over your addiction? How many times are you going to try until we use this new revolutionary and drastic way? And it works when people work these steps. It's amazing. I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though a great wind of mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. So Bill had a profound experience, and Bob had that too. In this book, they talk about the educational variety, which over time, which they say most people have. But I have a feeling that, and when we have that, step 3 talks about relieving of bondage of self, when that really hits us through the heart, that we can have that sudden change. Or we can have little sudden changes, realizing, and we talked about earlier about our stinking thinking, when we can stop thinking, intuitively we'll know how to handle these addictions and problems in our life. Now on the bottom of page 14, he goes, my friend, who is Ebby, had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. That's step 12. Practicing in all my affairs. Pretty amazing. So whatever affair you're upset with or every situation, we can practice this and be reasonably happy. It tells us that. And it goes on to say faith without works is dead. So the best way to learn something is to teach it. Ever hear that phrase? They say the best way to learn something is to teach you. Also, another way to show somebody something or to tell them something is by example. So either by teaching or by example. So it goes on to say, enlarge his spiritual life, right? Goes into top of page 15, through work and self-sacrifice for others. Again, working with others. He could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. And he goes on to say his wife and himself abandoned themselves. And because he started to find himself plagued, it says here in the next paragraph, by self-pity. During the day, we go back, maybe we're spiritual awakening, and then we have a tendency to go back a little bit. And that's why in the steps it talks about living in 10, 11, and 12. I was not too well at the time, plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. Almost drove me to drink. I was soon to find when other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. So what happened was, the story is that he would go to bars, and the reason that he came home despondent sometimes is because he'd come home and he'd say to Lois, his wife, Bill would say, he hadn't helped one alcoholic or one drunk, he went to all these bars. And so Lois said to him, but you're still sober. So it says in the book that we do this as an insurance policy by working with others and contacting others as to stay sober, abstinent. Now in the next paragraph, it's the last one on the page, what is pretty amazing, there are 3 sentences here that I repeat many times, I have underlined many times. And it says, Oh, before that,
If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button.
come to our free Zoom meeting. See info and description. Now back to our video. On the bottom of the second paragraph, and this is really pertinent, it is designed for living that works in rough going. So I needed a design for living. I needed perception towards life differently. And a lot of times I talk about the food addiction. I try to control it, but I never changed my perception. I try to control people and try to, if they bullied me, or try to tell them or win the argument. But I never changed my perception to love, tolerance, and patience, which we're going to learn through this book and the steps tell us. I never learned with my addictions to change my perception, realizing my body's God's temple. Even with the alcohol addiction, the perception change was I didn't want the synthetic chemical in my body. I didn't want the synthetic chemicals of junk food. I didn't want, the things that movie stars and glamorize and realize how miserable they are in most cases when they keep on chasing that, and it's never get enough, whatever the situation is. So this is what happens when Bill experienced the joy of living we really have even under pressure and difficulty. This is about on the middle of page 15. So it's saying in the most difficult situations, even though I go through the valley of death, what does the one in the Psalm say? The joy of living we really have. So how do we attain that? Even in the valley of death, the joy of living. Through working these steps in this program, we realize the spiritual answer, which is from within. We're trying to control the outside so we're not in a valley of death, right? How hopeless are we in our addictions, or our food addictions? And how miserable are we, and how enclosed, and we feel we're in the valley of death. But here it says we can have the joy of living. Because when we're in the fear, and we'll learn more about this as we do the steps, self-centered fear, we're paralyzed by it. We can't enjoy everything. We're in selfishness and self-pity. And this is really amazing because usually when we're upset, and we'll read about this in the book, resentment is the number one offender when we go into step 4. We also have what's called the sick man prayer. And it addresses that right here, what Bill experienced, the most impossible. Imagine that. The most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. So it's telling you when you work these steps, usually when you're miserable during the day, it's in relationship to people. Think about that. So here it's saying that can all be wiped out. You think this is possible? I've seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in lives of their families and communities. So no matter how much down the ladder you are, how much you hit bottom, it's really amazing how we can become vital and resume our place. And this last, again, if you read these 3 sentences, this last one on the bottom of page 15, there is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. So woe is me, how we wake up in the morning. Even today, some of you here are saying, oh, and you're such misery and such trouble. And it says there is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome. So it's telling us here that what actually, what Bill is saying he's experiencing, and he had all these issues and all these problems. And on page 16, it says near the bottom, faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we were to perish. Step 3, give my will and my life over to care of a higher power. Step 3. Most of us feel, this again is amazing, most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. No further for utopia. How far have you looked? How many times you traveled around the world to try to gain all material success and done all of these things to find utopia? Have you found it yet? No, because most of us here at the meeting today, right? But here's where he found it. We have it right here and now, and he talks about at his kitchen table. Here he was at his kitchen table with Ebby, right, in Brooklyn. And he had his meager, not meager, but I say small apartment. So here he was, and he found utopia. He found it. He found it. Bill wanted to be a great stockbroker, and he talks about that in the beginning of his story. He said he wanted to go out, and he also wanted to be a famous golfer. And all of these things brought him into the desperation of alcoholism, because you know why? And I found in my life too, when I was in my 20s, I had all these aspirations. They were so high, that I couldn't meet them. Expectations and resentments ready to happen. Ever hear that? So no wonder I was miserable, depressed, and into my addictions, because I had an idea about life. If you want to be happy, we were taught you had to go out and be what's called successful in material things. So no wonder I was miserable. But here he says that is little kitchen table. I'm sure it was pretty small. They have they have an apartment there which you could go see it. And so he's in utopia. Imagine that. And then next chapter we get into is there is a solution. So it's telling us here, and I read in the beginning, this is the steps in the instruction book of how we have recovered. And step 2 is really important. It's telling us there's a solution. Nearly all, it says, have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. Imagine that, solving your addiction problems. And it goes on to talk about here and talk about different economic and social levels. It doesn't matter. And then it goes on to say, from the vessel from steerage to captain's table. The history here is so amazing. Even like Bill, I was talking before about 1929 crash. He was right in the middle of it. Here we're talking about the Titanic, right? Relating it to the Titanic, the passengers and how from the disaster. All right, the disaster, think about that in history. Having shared in a common peril is one element that powerfully cements us and binds us together. So I'm sure, and they had survivors of the Titanic, and they had something in common. So here you're saying, and would never have held us together, we are now joined. Discovered, next paragraph, a common solution. We have a way out which we can absolutely agree upon, which can join in brotherly, harmonious action. This is the great news. The great news, right? And it talks about in the big book, the good news. So here Bill has, I heard this in a meeting just the other day, the great news. The great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So the moderator said, hey, it's even better than the good news. Here it's using the word great news. So, and it goes on to say, let's just keep on going on. It talks about people may have an illness, but they're not realizing that people who have an addiction is a serious illness, and it creates havoc in their lives. Then it goes down italics. It goes, but the great problem drinker who has found his solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. We were talking before earlier, I said, I sat down with a guy, we were talking about him sponsoring me, and he took my big book. In the front and the first, there's a blank page there. I guess it means like a blank slate. People talk about that in the big book. And he wrote, don't think. So it's telling us here, another confidence, an understanding is reached. So he conveyed to me something I never heard before. I went to all the experts and all the people I spoke to. They said, don't think. They analyzed and tried to think your way out of this situation. And we'll read later about Roland Hazard, who couldn't think his way out of the situation in this chapter. He tried to think it. He knew the mainsprings of life, but he couldn't think his way out. So, and we read in the Doc's opinion, who we went through, it's called a spiritual awakening. We need a spiritual way out of this. He called it back then moral psychology because he didn't want to use the word spiritual. And then later on, all the big book talks about is a spiritual awakening. It goes on, if you read on page 19, and I heard this also the other day, which was really emphasized in that meeting. We feel that elimination, see that 19, about 4 sentences down, of our drinking is but a beginning. It's just the beginning. When I came into AA or Overeaters Anonymous, other 12-step programs, I thought, and Overeaters Anonymous, I said, give me my diet program on a sheet of paper and I'm out of here. Did I realize it was just the beginning? Just the beginning? So if we go on, pretty amazing. We need a change of living, Some people do get sober, but they call it a dry drunk. But here it affords us the opportunity, if we want to take advantage of it, to change our perception and be like Bill had. He became very happy in life. We do everything for happiness. And Bill had found utopia. How much better can you get than that? Okay, so it goes down to bottom page 20. 3 types of drinkers. Now, this is very important. And you could relate it to other addictions. Say you're in food addiction. It says on the very bottom, the first one is a moderate drinker, having little trouble in giving up liquor entirely, or we could say food or drugs. If they have good reason for it, they can take it or leave it alone. So somebody could say to somebody, hey, you're getting a little bit, your lab values are off, you got to stop eating. Or somebody could say, you come into work the next day, you went out and you had a binge with the alcohol. And then these people, and this guy goes to himself and says, yeah, maybe that is a problem, and he stops. The same with another person who thought that they're overeating too much food and it's affecting health. They could stop. Okay, yeah, I'll stop, and they do. That's the moderate drinker or food person. Then we have The hard drinker, okay, he may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. So here he's a hard drinker. If sufficiently, this is important, strong reason, ill health and falling in love, change environment, or warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can stop and moderate. Though he may find it difficult or troublesome and may even need medical attention.